Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this wonderful dialogue. I am joined by a fabulous author, a woman by the name of Charlotte Dennett, and I am going to talk to her today about something monumentally important and an intersection of really everything that's going on at the moment. At first, I want to just introduce the time that we're recording this. We're recording this on September 3rd, Wednesday, September 3rd, 2025, at approximately 4 p.m. Eastern, and on a huge day with a lot of things happening in the world, from the Capitol steps of the victims of Epstein and their declaration of the Transparency Act, but also in context to this incredible sort of, I don't know, do we call it propaganda? We call it something that brought together Xi Jinping, and we see, Putin and Modi, and of course, Kim Il Jong, and everything that means with the BRIC powers in context to a very volatile and yet very precarious situation at the moment. And so I will show your book here momentarily, Charlotte, but I just want to introduce it initially by giving it a quick introduction. Charlotte Dennett is the former Middle East reporter. She's an investigative journalist and an attorney. Her latest book, just out in paperback, is called Follow the Pipelines: Uncovering the Mystery of the Lost Spy and the Deadly Politics for the Great Game of Oil. What an incredibly powerful title. Time magazine describes her as an expert in resource-based politics. Her previous books are with Gerald Colby, Thy Will Be Done, The Conquest of the Amazon, Nelson Rockefeller and the Evangelism in the Age of Oil, and of course, The People versus Bush, One Lawyer's Campaign to Bring the President to Justice. And I could obviously see that with a new name at the end of that title. But by the way, Charlotte, really powerful stuff. And I see a pattern here. And given really the full scope of this whole thing, it's hard to kind of parse out in this sort of world of madness. But doesn't it feel like the last 30 years have been the pipeline to this moment? How do you characterize what you're seeing and witnessing in real time?
What I'm witnessing right now is the continuation of what I call the great game for oil. It's been going on since actually World War One, and it's right up to the present. All these big powers vying against each other to see who can control oil, which is the fuel of the military. This is why you don't hear about it in the press. It's considered national security, but is definitely at play as we talk. And it goes back actually to Winston Churchill when he was First Lord of the Admiralty. And in 1911, he realized he had to change the British Navy's oil supply or energy supply, sorry, from coal to oil. Britain had lots of coal, it had no oil, but oil was cheaper and faster. And he predicted that Britain would have to fight on a sea of troubles to get it. And the first target was Iraq. And they succeeded. It was called a first-class war aim. And while most of us consider World War One to be about a European struggle, there was always that Middle East component of it. Lawrence of Arabia, that famous story about how the Brits were going to get the Arabs to get rid of the Turks that control most of the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire, and the Europeans were going to replace them. And so they achieved that war aim. And then that was by 1917. And I might just add here, if people want to explore this is the same time the Balfour Declaration, uh, affirming Britain's interest and acceptance of creating a Jewish state in Palestine. There's a geopolitical argument to that is worth exploring, and I can come back to it. But at any rate, by early 1930s, they had built the pipeline, and the pipeline went to Palestine, to Haifa, a port in Palestine. And so that is the Iraq Petroleum Pipeline, which later on it got closed in 1948 because of the Israeli war for independence. The Iraqis were no friends of Israel. They were very nationalistic, and saw creating this state as a colonial enterprise, so they didn't want it. But at any rate, what happened is that years later, after it was closed in 48, Benjamin Netanyahu, of all people, when he was finance minister of Israel, was very gung ho about Bush invading Iraq. And one of the things right after the invasion, he boasted that soon the oil will be flowing to Haifa. It's not a pipe dream. But he was wrong. It's still a pipe dream, and the reason it wasn't flowing is because of conflict in the region. But at any rate, I've sort of maybe gone off track here. Ask me another question.
Well, absolutely. But also some context too, because what I am considering here, and just having some kind of strange technical issues with my screen, and I apologize for that. Just trying to get well. Anyway, the bottom line is that you are an expert, and you have been for decades, and your research started from a place of a personal connection. Can you please
Yeah.
walk me through that?
Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah. So the personal connection is that my father was America's first master spy in the Middle East. He joined the OSS in 44. He was greatly prized because of his understanding of the region and its peoples, because he had taught at the American University of Beirut in the 30s, got to love the people, became an expert in the region. His code name was Carrot, Carat, as in jewel, as compared to other code names like monkey and squirrel. So he was highly prized. Anyway, he was sent to Saudi Arabia to determine the route of the Trans-Arabian Pipeline. And I knew this because I had his last letter home and I had his last report that had been turned over to my mother. Right after that visit, his plane crashed in Ethiopia. And I was 6 weeks old at the time. But when I became of age, in fact, when I became a journalist in the Middle East, I'd been born in Beirut, raised in Massachusetts, went back to Beirut uh, to attend high school, and then later became a journalist in the early 70s. And it was really then when I started to investigate what was this plane crash all about. And yes, I had the last letter home, and it was really about how important Saudi oil was going to be to the future of the United States. It truly turned it into a superpower, not only in the Middle East, but in the world. That's how rich the Saudi oil was. And his last letter home, when he went to Saudi Arabia, describes it. And then he describes in his last report home that he had a problem. He had a problem with Russia. I mean, sorry. Well, he did have a problem with Russia. He had a problem with the Syrians because they did not want the pipeline to go through Syria to end up in Haifa, Palestine. They were very nationalistic at the time. They considered it a colonial project. And so, anyway, there was this problem of getting the transit route fully nailed down. And what ultimately happened, and this was 2 years after my father died, and by the way, was replaced by Archie Roosevelt, um, was that now I've lost my train.
Can I just ask
Oh,
you a quick
yeah.
follow-up question? I'm so sorry. You continue.
No, what happened 2 years later was a coup. And Archie and Kermit Roosevelt were both involved in it. It was the first CIA coup in the Middle East. Most people don't even know about it. It was against Syria, not Iran. That was the second CIA coup after Mossadegh nationalized the oil. The first one was against Syrian President Kouatly because he objected to the pipeline going through Syria. So they overthrew and put in, a tool of their interests and an army chief, and he approved it. He didn't care where it went through. And so it eventually went through. And the tap line, it's called, had a huge influence on the region. And it was my investigating that really got me interested. Wonderful article in the New York Times March 2nd, 1947, is all about this new pipeline and why it's going to add issues to the Middle East. And the article written by Clifton Daniel, who became Truman's son-in-law, he married a daughter. But I don't know, I guess Clifton Daniels had some inside information. But it was all a geopolitical analysis. What does this pipeline mean, and who's going to benefit and who's going to hurt? And what comes through in the article is that there's competition even among American allies. And that's one thing I learned from studying my father. I sued the CIA, I got a bunch of documents back, and I was learning that at the time he was there, the Great Game was off and running. The British were intensely jealous of American getting that Saudi exclusive concession. And so were the French, and so were the Russians. They were all vying against each other to get the oil so that they could fuel their military. So that's
Wow.
how my
Well, not
investigation
just,
started.
but not just military, the entire global infrastructure of the economic paradigm, which is insane when you think what you just laid out. You said Roosevelt, even though obviously it's not FDR and it's not Teddy, it's, I guess, Archie, who I'm assuming is connected to a family
No,
member.
yeah, to Teddy.
Okay, well,
Yeah, Teddy.
so
Yeah,
there's a familiar name. So is the familiar name. I think you said a son-in-law of Truman. Did I hear you say that?
yeah, Clifton Daniels.
Okay, so now, and then you mentioned CIA and you mentioned Saudi. Oh, wow. And that was, what years are we talking about here after Lawrence of Arabia? Because you already talked about Churchill in 1919. When did
Yeah.
Lawrence of Arabia end? Basically, when did they move the Turks out?
Well, 1917 was when it was they had completed the capture of the Iraqi oil.
So you kind of fast forwarded to after World War II at this point, right?
Well, there's World War I, then there's World War II, and
Yeah.
I'm just told you about World War II.
Yeah.
That during it, my father was looking at the Trans-Arabian pipeline,
Okay.
and then
Okay. So
and it was only afterwards. It was only after World War II that it was built. Aramco built it. It was called Tapline, the Trans-Arabian Pipeline, and that made the United States a superpower, and still is.
right.
Saudi
Well,
oil has been key all the
okay.
way through.
So let me just set this up, and then we'll go into the next phase of this. Because just recently we saw, for example, um, where do I want to start with the accolades here? I mean, first, the Saudi, the 9/11 families just got, for the first time in their efforts for the last 23 years or so, to sue Saudi Arabia, for example, right? Just happened a couple of days ago. I think last Thursday. We'll see what kind of bears out from there. I've got my doubts and so forth, and I've been following it closely for the last 2 decades. But then, of course, we had the
Well, what did they get? What did you find they got? I saw the 60 Minutes show about the bone
no, no, no.
fragments.
A judge just recently approved that they can finally sue Saudi. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they can. That's what they've been angling in on forever. Okay, and a lot of that goes with the redacted 25 pages and all of the other elements that were involved, and of course Bob Graham's work. And I could come back to that, but we could talk about that for days. But I just wanted to use this as kind of a jumping off point because today, of course, we had the victims of Epstein, right? And they're on the steps of the Capitol, and they're building this so-called, with of course Marjorie Taylor Greene in front of it, that just
I
absolutely
know. Did
Scott.
that blow your mind or what?
Yeah, I kept thinking to herself, she's like, "Oh yeah, we're not going to back down to naming names." And I see like this picture of the Joker, President Trump, over her shoulder in my mind because I'm like, "Yeah, right, Marjorie." But all that being said, the idea of the Transparency Act, right? And so you've got, I'm connecting the dots of some major things that your work, your astonishing work, your work of the power of the world that undergirds everything that we need to understand, especially as we're going to foment it into now, right? Into the
Yeah.
conflicts. But to set the construction of this question up further, you mentioned Russia. Well, of course, the first thing that popped in my mind, even though I know the time period and everything else, but first and foremost, for the audience to think about, that picture of Mohammed bin Sultan and Putin recently just laughing, which I was like, what are they laughing about a couple of years ago, which was really intriguing. But then
Oh,
you have to put
Mohammed Bonesaw.
right, and you have to put the in this construction, the nature of the Koch brothers' father, Fred Koch, not to be confused with Fred Trump. Fred Koch built the infrastructure of the mammoth. It's not as big as Guar, but it's close in not Ukraine, but whatever that area of the Soviet Union was for Stalin. So it was like the power that the Koch brothers inherited to build this technocratic scenario that wants us to get back to this scenario where Donald Trump is kind of this apex of hitting the rewind on all things oil and basically destroying the progress of renewable energies. Last Friday, we had the announcement that $687 billion that was approved under the Biden administration has been gutted by Trump. And now the EPA, basically all the directors of the board got fired. And we know that we just got rid of the Clean Water and Air Act that was, basically a mainstay since the 70s. So in terms of follow the pipelines, you're in the center of this whole thing the whole time. It was always the power. And what does it mean now?
Um, Absolutely. And by the way, I did a piece for Counterpunch in 2020. And that's when I knew that Trump is totally beholden to oil. And by the way, there's big oil, and then there is independent oil. There's old wealth and new wealth. The new wealth is trying to get in. That's part of it too. Even Bush would be considered, George W. Bush would be considered new wealth oil compared to the Rockefellers, which I wrote about. And so they're trying to get in, and they resent the fact that all the great contracts, the big ones, go to big oil like Exxon, BP, Chevron, etc. So they're trying to get in. And there was Trump holding a campaign rally in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This was back in 2020. I wrote about it, and people were looking at how obscene, because that was the site of the massacre, the Greenwood massacre. They just obliterated a whole community of black people that lived there. Think about Gaza. And they didn't like them having control over oil. There were some black entrepreneurs who were getting into this fledgling oil industry. Tulsa was considered the capital of the oil industry at that point. And so here he was having a fundraiser right next door to this. And it turns out that he was wooing a donor by the name, I believe it's Harold Hamm, who was control of, I think it's the Continental Pipeline or oil company, who was regarded as the leader of the oil renaissance. Read oil independence renaissance. And and so that defines Trump going forward more than anything. I mean, like big tech got on to him during his second campaign, his second run for presidency. But yeah, he's totally beholden to them, and that's why he's looking. Also, he wanted to, you know, conquer Canada, go into Alaska, go into Greenland. They are all rich in oil and natural resources. He wants to build a great oil kingdom. I think that's his idea. And then come to think of it, you know, all of his garish gold that he put into the White House. I mean, it's sort of a disgusting new wealth showing off, but that's what it's all about. And we can talk about Gaza if you want.
Oh no, we will. We'll get to that because you made some incredibly important analogies there that I want to pick up on, and I want to get their backdoor through this sort of analysis. But first and foremost, about Tulsa, there was a great fictional series on HBO recently that depicts that. Because yes, the United States military attacked Black Wall Street, and that was the first time I realized that it was all tethered to the oil. But that certainly makes all the sense in the world. And then you said, oh yeah, and just like Gaza, think Gaza. And when I was thinking about the whole Trump situation here, particularly as it relates to some of the players that you were involved with, Trump's always been real estate first, right? And back in the 80s, we know that he had a relationship with none other than Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi royal arms dealer, and you talked about the gold. Well, Saudi oil. Where did excuse me, gold in the palatial monarchy and all things that relates to. In his first administration, the first place he went to was obviously Riyadh, and then we know that
Yeah.
Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin became hedge fund managers and real estate acolytes for Saudi first, but then now we see UAE with the 747 and so forth. So yeah, the ties are just spectacular. But to also drive the point home, you're about to get into Gaza and the humanitarian scenario of it. All like there's nothing that can stop these guys. But then I mean, really, that's the way they're approaching this whole thing. But in addition to that, I think of God, where was I going to go with? Well, it's just the corruption is just absolutely insane. It's out in the open. There is no sort of make believe. It's just like this is what we're going to do. Oh, this is what I was going to say. Basically, they got rid of the EPA again. Let's not forget about that.
Yeah.
They got rid of the EPA. So we're in a complete situation given everything that we know about climate change, and that they're going to use this Orwellian sort of effort to basically scrub climate science, not to mention they attacked universities and they've got all sorts of their fingers in that situation as well. Now let's jump into Gaza because now I have a better systemic approach to what it is you're talking about. Not to mention that Netanyahu was the finance minister of Israel during the Iraq War. I find that fascinating.
Yeah. And wanted to reopen the Iraq petroleum pipeline, which he did not succeed in doing. He always had a vision for turning Israel into a energy corridor. And so the invasion of Iraq happened in 2003. But the first discovery of major oil and natural gas off the coast of Israel was what happened in 2000. And then in 2010, there was even a larger discovery of oil and natural gas. The full total of it, all offshore, is worth $500 billion. Okay? So this dream of turning it into an energy corridor has been with Netanyahu ever since the invasion of Iraq, and so they're trying to think of how to exploit it. The problem is that if you're going to run pipelines up the coast of the Mediterranean, and I really would encourage people to get out their maps. I mean, it explains everything. The whole Eastern Mediterranean. What is on the Eastern Mediterranean where all this oil and gas is? There's Gaza, that I'm going south to north, all right? Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, Syria, and then in the upper part, Turkey. But at any rate, there's been conflict in all those areas. And no major financial institution will fund such an infrastructure project if there's conflict. So, how do you deal with that? Simple. You wipe out the Gazans, get rid of them. And I mean the words that they've used, why finish the job, and even one of the defense ministers had said that there's no way the Gazans are going to get control over their share. It's called the Gaza Marine, and they still haven't got control of it. No way they're going to get it because any money they would earn from the revenues would go to terrorism, not to developing the country. Whereas Arafat, the late PLO leader, had thought that this Gaza Marine was going to finally give the Palestinians some economic independence. I mean, even if they were reliant on oil, that's not necessarily a blessing, as we've learned in other countries where the people don't benefit, it's only the guys on top. Nonetheless, that was the whole rationale for doing two different invasions before the ones in October 2023. One was in 2009, the other was in 2014. They killed thousands of Palestinians. Sole purpose was to prevent the Gazans from controlling that oil. Isn't that sickening? And
It
so,
is. I mean, but it undergirds, for me personally, I go back to quite frankly 9/11, right? I think about
yeah.
9/11 and what happened on 9/11 and what do we know about 9/11? Well, I can tell
Oh,
you.
let me just intervene for just a second. You may not know this. I sit on the lawyers committee for 9/11 inquiry. It's been my interest as well. but
Well, then you
continue.
probably have a lot more answers than I do, but I can tell you some answers that I've been involved with for many years and continue to have questions as it emanates from the Bob Graham inquiry. But just to cut to the chase, Bush and Cheney had the information. And of course, we know that the FBI knew where the cells were. We knew who was funding the cells. We knew that our intelligence agencies weren't working together to thwart them. And so you start to think that as kind of the domino, not to mention for those of us who understand the dominance of the hegemony of the world's fiat currency through the dollar is all part and parcel to this and things that are playing out. So I am curious when you think about the humanitarian, if you will, not humanitarian, it's not even humanitarian. It's like these entities will stop at nothing to maintain control and hegemony because of all of the paradigmatic stuff that's involved with it. We could talk about finance, we could talk about the war machine, we could talk about everything. But if you talk,
Profits,
what's that?
profits.
Profits, of course, but to the hands of the few,
Yeah,
carnage of the rest. But then you think
right.
of the global paradigm in terms of climate change. And I mean, it's unfreaking believable that in 20, I mean, this is my theory, and this is why I'm saying it this way. Everything we've been in the midst of for since 2001, since 9/11, is a continuation to make sure that the renewable energy revolution doesn't happen. And everybody is in the crosshairs of that, one way or the other.
Okay, well, that's an interesting analysis. I think that I'm a great believer in context, in historical context.
Absolutely.
So it is useful to go back, go back to the pre 9/11 years
Okay.
and then rush forward. And so, yeah, the 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 neocons had a vision of creating a new Middle East, and even before Bush came into power. And then right after 9/11, it was the head of NATO, Wesley Clark, a NATO commander, who was had a conversation with a Pentagon official who told him that, and I'm going to quote from here, we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years. This is right after 9/11, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing it off with Iran. Well, let's see what's happened to those countries. They've all been immersed in horrific conflict. And I mean, none of it has truly helped the United States as far as I can see, but maybe, the people on top, they don't care. And you're right, I had a person call me who was from Alberta, which is a big oil producing section of Canada. He said, "Oh, I know the game well. I know people who worked in the industry, and I will tell you exactly what you said. They will stop at nothing to get the oil. I mean, they will kill, they will torture, they will invade, they will assassinate, and they will go to war for oil. That's what it's all about. They're so tremendously powerful, and it's upsetting. It's a how can we contend with oil companies? And I'm sure that's how a lot of the media feel. I just had a recent revelation, um, and that was there's a woman who has sued Big Oil, the first woman to sue Big Oil, because her mom died in a climate dome, a heat dome. And so she sued them, and their defense was, oh, this is going to hurt business. This is not good for America. And then they added that all our members of Congress know this. This is a national security issue. So you see, this is why you never hear about it. You never hear about oil funding the military. Um, you know, all the big powers learned this after the defeat of Germany in both World War I and World War II. They both lost the war because their war machine ran out of gas. So there you go. Oh, that one other little thing. While I was investigating my father's papers that I got declassified, there's this great one It's called Analysis of Work, and he wrote it in 44. It was sort of his marching orders, which he was reiterating. And one thing he said in terms of America's interest, numero uno, we must control the oil of Saudi Arabia at all costs. Some of it was redacted, but not all of it. I was able to figure that out. It was Saudi oil at all costs. And then I started to think, there you go, at all costs. Did I just mention assassinations, wars, etc.? They don't care. They're going to do it at all costs. And that has been the story all the way up through the Cold War, right up into our 21st century and all the endless wars that we have going on right now. It's disgusting.
Okay, it is, and I'm going to do a quick plug here. Well, and again, I'll put your book down below in the description and everything else, and of course links to your work and everything. And I still want to continue, but I want to use this to bring attention to what it is that I do, if I can use my stuff correctly here, my hands. The Clean New Deal, right? So what is the Clean New Deal? The Clean New Deal is just the opposite of what you've talked about, because I've been in the midst of this my whole life. I mentioned in our last conversation, I come from Houston, Texas. My father and my granddad were both in the fossil fuel matrix, right? So I grew up with this whole thing. But then, of course, as I grew and I got educated and I learned the ways of the world and I traveled and I understood climate, science, and it's like, okay, it's time to transition. Oh, wait a second. The last 25 years, we're not transitioning. Everything is a smoke and mirrors to prevent, what it is that I've just said several times in this conversation. Trump just killed the renewable energy initiative through wind, and now we're going to see it happen with offshore wind, and we're going to see it with all of the other elements, even though we know that a lot of that stuff, particularly solar, is so far in advance that can compete and so on and so forth. They're going to do everything they can to kill all that stuff. But again, it's the pipelines, right? And so I'm looking at this and I'm trying to understand, okay, where does Putin get most of his leverage from? Obviously, fossil fuel. And
Yeah.
what is Ukraine about? Well, I think
Oh,
it's
yeah.
about,
Well, first of all, I mean, he is the other major oil power. They got tons of it. Okay. And just, I'll get back to it, but remember where Trump just recently wanted to increase tariffs on India because it was getting its oil from Russia?
yeah.
You see? So that's a great game going on right now. Um, so
Russia and
Russia,
Ukraine in Gaza. I mean, are there corollaries? Is my question, because why would Russia, who supported Syria for the entire Cold War, sit on the sidelines the way they have post October 7th? That's what I don't understand.
well, I haven't figured that one out yet, to tell you the truth. I do know that Russia has supported Syria in the past, and there were all sorts of efforts to get Syria to accept a pipeline deal that would have run from Qatar and across the Saudi Peninsula and go into Syria. And he rejected it, and this was around 2010. He rejected Assad, who was then president, rejected it because he didn't want to upset his Russian backers because they saw that as competition with the Russians. The Russians were supplying Europe with over 40% of its energy, and the U.S. hated that. And so, and they wanted to bypass Russia and make sure that Europe got oil and gas from other places, and that's where Ukraine fits in. If you look at a map of Russia, and even if you Google it, you will see it's crisscrossed by pipelines. These were built in the Soviet era, but then there was the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and that was running from Russia, and it was going to connect to Germany, and that was going to provide even more. This would be natural gas to Europe. And as you know, one of the first things that happened after the Russian invasion is that Biden told Germany and the world, this cannot happen. He came right out and said, this cannot happen. And then, months later, we had the sabotage of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which apparently we now have it confirmed that there was a Ukrainian that was involved. He's even been arrested by the Germans, no less. But at any rate, getting back to your question about why is Russia on the sidelines, I can't answer that. There are all sorts of maneuvers going on right now. Israel, um, well, actually, the West. You see, Biden is involved as well. The Biden administration. I mean, people. Oh dear, people can ask. Wait, I got to turn this off. Oh, stop! I should have turned my phone off. Well, anyway, um, Biden and the European powers, the G7, met, and this is in September, before the October 7th Hamas thing, and they were cooking up a scheme, and it's called IMEC, India Middle East, um, India Middle East Corridor, and that is a huge project that they are considering, and it means running a pipeline uh, underneath the sea from India to Saudi Arabia, and then across Saudi Arabia and terminating in guess where? Haifa, Palestine.
About that.
And it's going to be pipelines and electricity grids and railroads and the so even I looked at the route of it, and it seems to be following the same route of the Trans-Arabian pipeline that was closed during 1948. Looks like a very similar route. But anyway, I've got this great picture, if I can find it here, of Netanyahu. Here, I'm going to show it up to your screen, and then people can look for it. They can Google it. So here it is. This is Netanyahu talking at the UN in September 2023, the same time they're meeting over IMEC, and he's describing the region in terms of a blessing or a curse. And one map shows the curse, and that's the axis of resistance that he's called it, and Trump and the rest. And on the right is the blessing, and that is this IMEC deal. So it's a huge deal. Its whole point is to counteract the Russians' um, Belt and Road Initiative,
That was
which
China,
is,
right? I
I
thought,
mean, China. Sorry. Thank you for correcting me. Yeah. So, yeah, they're very concerned about China. They're still concerned about Russia. Biden had a expert in energy infrastructure, interestingly enough, who he sent out to be a diplomat. He worked with Lebanon to work out a pipeline deal with because there's oil and gas off the coast of Lebanon, and so the guy's name is Adam Hochstein, and he's been traveling all over trying to cut deals. And one of the places where they were looking at was Syria. You know, uh, are they going to revive this idea of the Qatar to Syria pipeline that Assad rejected? Okay, so Russia is obviously eyeing this very carefully because what happened is Assad came up with an alternative idea of running a pipeline from Iran and to Syria, and Russia was okay with that because they felt they could monitor everything because Assad was sort of a puppet of the Russians. So I don't know where they're standing. It's a very good question. I'll have to look it up.
well,
I
but
could
it's real.
probably Google and get answers.
The things that really blow up in my mind. Okay, but before I get there, I just want to ask you because I started with the conversation with the question, or I should say, just the framing that we had the Epstein victims on the Capitol steps talking about the Transparency Initiative, right? And if I think about that in context to our conversation, I know that Russia and a lot of the Middle Eastern powers that be that are specifically in the fossil fuel industry were also extracting and laundering a lot of this money through none other than the likes of Bear Stearns and to our Wall Street markets that were financing and involved with subprime. And there's a lot of that. Is there any connection that you're aware of between Epstein and some of these other players that are involved?
Well, when I started the interview and said I can't keep up with it, that's part of it because with all the swirls of rumors that are going on, it's now coming out. that Epstein was actually working for Israeli intelligence,
Right.
and that Epstein. Now this came out in Middle East Monitor and elsewhere, not yet substantiated, but that the whole point was he's going to entrap powerful people, including members of Congress, in a honey trap, and then blackmail them, and Israel would get information so that the names, would not be released, but these guys were blackmailed. I find that plausible, even though this is all breaking news. I mean, everything's coming out now. It makes perfect sense to me. I can't say it for sure, but it's certainly worth pursuing. What do
Well,
you think?
it all makes complete perfect sense, except this is the thing that hung you up a minute ago, and it does hang me up because I'm going to pick up on the Belt and Road Initiative because we know China has also been in Africa. That there's a lot of
Yeah,
so because of my background, because of my career as a documentary filmmaker, one of the early films that I had produced, I remember going to Rice University in Houston, Texas, and speaking with a former general counsel of the Shell oil company, who was then, I think, basically the head of the department of all things Rice University's involvement with research and development and how the whole oil paradigm works. And what he described to us was the investments, literally in these mammoth operations in different countries like Africa require 40 years before the investors literally see the upside. Okay. There's billions and billions of dollars, and you've got to take over the countries, you've got to deal with the oligarchs, you've got to be able to maintain whatever and this, like you said, it works out for the guys at the top, right? And
yeah,
so
yeah,
these companies are heavily fortified in what we've seen over the course of the last several decades as well. We know that there's giant hedge fund guys that are all over these countries that are putting these deals together, right? And
yeah,
so it's the financial capital flows, and of course we saw in 2019 the world's largest IPO, which was of course none other than Saudi Aramco, but basically engineered by Wall Street, right? So you look at these scenarios, but the thing that doesn't make sense in 2025, right? Considering
yeah.
what we just talked about, and I really wonder if you've thought about this, but it's kind of like, okay, if Putin is going to sit on the sideline and let Syria, maybe, well, Iran for that matter, be attacked by, Trump, given all the things that were going on in Gaza. And then we're hearing this percolation of the greater Israel project. And you think to yourself that the Abraham Accords, okay, how in the world was it that the Saudis were going to ignore the plight of Gaza based on what they've done the last many decades and everything they did beforehand? What's changed the calculus here that's just so obvious, right? Because when you drop bombs on Iran to take out their nuclear installations, given what you talked about with Netanyahu, do you have a theory on what is going down and what's next? Because it doesn't make sense given who the players are.
Well, I can say what makes sense from the point of view of the Western powers that are pro-Israel and have not stepped in enough to present what happened in Gaza. That's one thing, and it just came out. The Great Gaza Post-War Plan. This was leaked. Apparently, it must have
This is
been leaked
real
to
estate,
Washington Post and the Middle East. Yeah,
real estate
you
for
can
Trump,
ask.
by the way.
Pardon me?
Real estate for Trump, like oceanfront property.
Oh, it's amazing. There's a map of it. People should Google it. They look into it, and the map. I'm just going to show it up. People got to Google it and look for it. There it is. That's that, that's the development plan for Gaza. And Trump has always talked about real estate and Riviera, and so is Kushner. They don't talk about the oil. But I was looking at the map, and it shows here's that corridor. It seems to me it looks like the corridor. It's got trains on it, but and going up. Wait, see, it's got trains going right up there. I would bet that that's where the pipeline is going as well. The pipelines. They may be going underground, but there's this place set aside for this whole infrastructure development, and then there's canals, and then there are all these high rises, and so get get rid of the Gazans. It's just disgusting. I did two things I wanted to mention also was so I don't have a set theory yet, except I know what the Western powers want. And it's all big power competition. Now, Russia is aligned with China now. So Russia is probably very much invested in the Belt and Road Initiative, which is sort of similar, very going into Africa big time. The Chinese are there, but they're going all over the world and they're offering much better investment terms. That's why they're freaking out because they're saddling the West is saddling these countries with massive debts, but the Russians have figured out, and the Chinese have figured out financing mechanisms where it's not so oppressive, and so they're winning out. So that's part of the great game. The other thing I wanted to mention is that right before the October 7th attack, uh, um, there was a meeting of Biden and some of the top European companies and Israel. Sorry, Biden, Europe, some European, and Israel. And the whole idea is to help develop a plan where Israel would supply natural gas to Ukraine because Ukraine was suffering because of the Ukrainian war and wasn't getting all that Russian gas. So there you go. They want the energy corridor. Biden wants it, and this explains why he didn't act strongly on the genocide and will forever live with the name Genocide Joe to his great shame. And now Trump making it even worse. He's just giving Netanyahu, full pass. Do whatever you take, whatever it takes.
Right,
Flatten them, get rid of them.
right. But you didn't address, and I'm curious what you respond to here. Okay, but Mohammed bin Sultan or Mohammed, what did you call him?
Salmon.
Yeah, but you call Solomon. Sorry, but
Yeah.
what was your nickname for him? Saw,
Mohammed Bonesaw.
Bone Saw. Yeah, right.
Yeah, he
Which of course goes Khashoggi's
he
nephew.
was be yeah, he was behind the Khashoggi killing that, you know.
Yeah, right. But so, what's your theory on Saudi and Israel?
Well, Saudi and Israel have been engaged in back channel negotiations for a long time. And the only problem for Netanyahu is that Saudi Arabia has been for decades deemed the leader of the Muslim world. And with Mecca and Medina and the annual pilgrimages going on there. And there is a base they have to worry about. All these Gulf countries have to worry about their bases to some degree. So that signing on with a deal with Israel is a tricky maneuver. And the one thing that they all insist in is that there's got to be a Palestinian state, right? That's going to appease their base supposedly. Well, now we're getting to almost beyond it. It's just total rubble. I I mean, I don't see the Israelis wanting to have any kind of a state of Palestinians next to them. Meanwhile, they've turned a lot of angry people into even angrier people. One person says, "You starve a people, they will come and eat you." But I mean, you get the point. I mean, how do you think the people in Gaza feel about Israel right now? How do you think they feel about the United States and about all the countries in the world that are just sitting back and not applying the pressure of like no more military, cutting off absolutely military aid? It's because they all got something, or their leaders do. The rest of us watch, genocide on TV and are appalled and feel helpless. And the only thing we can do is just like you and me, what can we do? We try as hard as we can to get the word out to people, and it is getting to people, I do think.
Well, the blindfold
But
garage.
just the Epstein thing, I just want to come back to that. Here is people being angry about two tiers of justice. All
Right.
right, right,
Absolutely.
and that unites all of us, all the rest of us that are not on the top 1% of the 1% or whatever.
Yeah,
Well,
according to
the
Marjorie
same
Taylor
thing,
Greene,
yeah,
that's what she
and
said.
the same thing can be said about how we're powerless in all these endless wars. It also has to deal with 9/11. I will tell you that the lawyers committee has tried to present evidence in the Southern District Court of New York and the appellate court and the Supreme Court to get evidence of criminal behavior linked to the collapse of the towers. And they have a right to do it under the law, but they to present evidence, okay, but they've been prevented, even though it's against the law. The judges, they won't have it. 9/11, there's going to be a huge meeting in Washington, D.C. from the 10th to the 12th, and you are going to have some major people who have been on this subject for years. They're going to come, they're going to testify, they're going to release information, and they're going to ask for a new investigation. And it's happening the 10th to the 12th in Washington, D.C. So there is a movie called Crime Scene to Courtroom that's going to be shown. And I think it's going to be shown. A lot of those players are in it. There are a lot of people on both sides that do not accept the official version of 9/11, which was the worst terrorist attack in American history. Now, don't you think it's up to the people to try to find out what that's about too?
Yeah, I've been in
Release the 9/11 files, release them all, or do a new investigation.
I've been in the midst of this the whole time, and that's why I had to make my work, which is all the same pattern. And in fact, I had published a couple of things this afternoon that I think are very relevant on my Blue Sky feed. I said I put a picture of Harvey Weinstein, a picture of P Diddy, a picture of Epstein, and I just said, complicity, duplicity, massive racketeering, USA, USA, USA. First and foremost, we've become a criminal racket that uses predation as the undergirding the pinnings of what we are. And this has been the journey I've been on, because I start with the 2008 great financial crisis, and you're talking about the largest terrorism in the history of the United States. I call the largest financial terrorism in the history of the world that never ended. What led me to this, the Clean New Deal, because what we've discovered is, because of the paradigm of the dollar hegemony as the global reserve currency, which is tied none other to oil. That has been the commoditization of the dollar since Bretton Woods in '71, and the nature of everything that imbues. But what we've discussed here the whole time, and what I continue to tell the audience over and over and over, and people, please go read Charlotte Dennett's Follow the Pipelines, which I'll obviously put in the description below. But as it relates to the Clean New Deal, and this is where I've been since literally the late 90s, but now I've had the last 27 years to see this stuff inside the belly of the beast, and to have this all come, to completely, so obvious that nobody can avoid this now, especially after those rulings that I talked about that are destroying the renewable energy paradigm. When you understand that all of the money is tied to the global financial oil matrix, and you understand that the guys on top that are trading, and they're above the law, they're above repute, because of course they can rape and pillage everything, they can destroy everything. This in context to the climate science, the only way humanity is going to get through this is to part the frickin' Red Sea in the clouds of the pollution of corruption to foster in the Clean New Deal. The Clean New Deal takes all of these elements that we're talking about, and we reconfigure the entire paradigm so that the entire world goes to renewable. If it doesn't do that, what are we going to expect?
Yeah, the destruction of the planet. I mean, one way or the other. That's the thing that is so scary, because either we're going to have a massive climate change disaster. We are already seeing them. It's not like we haven't been forewarned. Or we're going to have nuclear war. And the same people are responsible.
That's right.
I mean,
And can they survive in their $50 million?
that's the whole point. That's why they want to go to Mars. That's what Elon Musk is about, right? Let them. They got their escape valves. They're trying to do it. They probably see the writing on the wall. Oh, we better get out of here. We might destroy the planet. Oh my God.
It's amazing.
It's so
You're
serious.
amazing. Your work is amazing. I'll have links to everything below. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
I can't. I'm just so glad we had this conversation. You and I are on the same path. I really appreciate talking with you, and I always learn something from you as well. You know,
You're an amazing
the
human being.
the only other thing I can say, please get my book. I'm not going to make millions on this book, but inform yourselves. Inform yourselves. That's why I wrote it. That's why you do what you do.
Follow the pipelines, my friends. It's the thumbprint of exactly how this whole world operates. And thank you so much, Charlotte Dennett. Thank you so much for your time. Please continue the struggle, and I look forward to reconnecting you with you when we can. All the best.
Thank you, Patrick. Have
Thank
a
you.
great one.
You too.